For 13 years, he was the most tested athlete on the planet, and he passed almost every single test. He beat cancer, won cycling's hardest race 7 times in a row, built a global charity worn on millions of wrists, and sued anyone who said it wasn't real. Then, in 2012, it all came apart anyway, not because a test finally caught him, but because 11 of his own teammates decided to tell the truth at the same time. In 1996, Lance Armstrong is diagnosed with an aggressive cancer that has already spread to his lungs and brain. He survives, returns to professional cycling, and in 1999 wins the Tour de France, cycling's single hardest and most prestigious race. Then he wins it again and again, 7 times in a row, an achievement no one has ever come close to matching. He becomes one of the most famous athletes alive, and his foundation, Livestrong, raises hundreds of millions of dollars for cancer patients worldwide. The cancer very nearly kills him. Doctors give him roughly a 50% chance of survival, and that's before it's confirmed the disease has already spread to his brain, requiring surgery just to remove the tumors there. He founds the Lance Armstrong Foundation the same year, and within a decade, the yellow Livestrong wristband becomes one of the most recognizable pieces of plastic on the planet, worn by presidents, worn by tens of millions of ordinary people, a symbol of survival built entirely around his own story. But almost from the first yellow jersey, there are whispers from rival riders, from journalists, from people inside his own team, that something about the 7 straight wins doesn't add up. And for over a decade, Armstrong's answer to every single one of those whispers is the same: deny, discredit, and if necessary, sue. The most persistent voice is Sunday Times journalist David Walsh, who starts investigating Armstrong as early as 1999 and keeps writing about the doubts for over a decade, at real professional cost. The newspaper is sued and settles rather than fight. Inside the sport, teammate Greg LeMond, America's only other Tour de France winner at the time, publicly questions the results and is frozen out of the cycling world for saying so. And Betsy Andreu, the wife of teammate Frankie Andreu, testifies for years that she personally heard Armstrong admit to doping to his doctors in a hospital room in 1996, an account Armstrong spent over a decade denying, and would only later admit was true. What was actually happening, according to the sworn testimony of 11 of Armstrong's own former teammates, was one of the most sophisticated doping programs cycling had ever seen, built around EPO to boost oxygen-carrying red blood cells, testosterone, human growth hormone, and blood transfusions timed to specific race stages, all coordinated with a team doctor named Michel Ferrari, and at times, delivered by a courier nicknamed Moto Man. The program isn't just about the drugs themselves, it's about staying one step ahead of the testers. In 1999, Armstrong tests positive for a banned corticosteroid during his very first Tour win. The result is explained away with a backdated prescription for a skin cream, produced only after the positive test came to light. Riders on the team later testified they were tipped off before surprise tests arrived, giving them time to use saline to dilute their blood values back into a legal range. The people closest to the team knew first. Armstrong's own masseuse, Emma O'Reilly, later said she'd seen makeup used to hide needle marks on his arm. When she said so publicly, Armstrong's team didn't just deny it, they sued her, and journalists who reported her claims for defamation. Time and again, across more than a decade, the legal system became the shield the doping program hid behind. Over the following decade, Armstrong and his team sue, or threaten to sue, nearly everyone who speaks up. Journalists, a masseuse, a former mechanic, a promotions company. Most defendants, facing enormous legal costs against a global sports icon with millions in sponsorship money behind him, settle or go quiet rather than fight. The strategy isn't really about winning any single case. It's about making the cost of telling the truth higher than most people are willing to pay. The SCA promotions case is the closest anyone comes to catching him under oath before 2012. The company had ensured a bonus tied to his Tour wins and refused to pay after doping allegations surfaced. Armstrong testified for hours, denying every accusation in a sworn deposition, testimony that would later be used directly against him once the truth came out, turning what he'd once called his biggest legal victory into one of his most damaging pieces of evidence. And it worked. Armstrong won settlement after settlement, including a case against an insurance company that tried to withhold a bonus over doping suspicions, a case he won and was paid roughly $10 million for, while under oath denying he'd ever doped. For years, suing his accusers wasn't just a defense, it was proof to the public that the accusations must be false. Nobody sues that aggressively if they're guilty, or so everyone assumed. Armstrong wasn't racing against clean competition either. In the years that followed, positive tests and confessions swept through nearly every rider who ever stood on a podium next to him, which is exactly why cycling's governing body never reassigned most of his 7 strip titles to a runner-up. There was no one left to give them to. The cover-up survived criminal investigations, media exposés, and years of suspicion. What it couldn't survive was the US anti-doping agency deciding to build its case not around a failed drug test, but around people. Investigators methodically gathered sworn testimony from 11 former teammates, including Tyler Hamilton, Floyd Landis, and George Hincapie, one of Armstrong's closest and most trusted teammates for over a decade. The full case file, every plea, every sentence, and what happened at Lillehammer is linked below. If you want to know which scandal we're opening next, subscribe. There's a new file every Tuesday and Friday. The people closest to the team knew first. Armstrong's own masseuse, Emma O'Reilly, later said she'd seen makeup used to hide needle marks on his arm. When she said so publicly, Armstrong's team didn't just deny it, they sued her, and journalists who reported her claims for defamation. Time and again, across more than a decade, the legal system became the shield the doping program hid behind. In February 2012, federal prosecutors abruptly closed the criminal investigation with no charges filed, and for a moment, it looks like Armstrong has survived his closest call yet. What almost nobody expects is that USADA, the anti-doping agency, decides to press forward with its own case regardless, using the very same witness testimony the criminal investigators had already gathered. In January 2013, Armstrong sat down with Oprah Winfrey and, for the first time in 13 years, admitted it. The EPO, the blood transfusions, all of it. Sponsors dropped him within hours. He stepped down from the charity that bore his name. Years of lawsuits followed, including a fraud case brought by the same insurance company he'd once beaten, which this time went the other way, and a federal whistleblower lawsuit tied to the US Postal Service's sponsorship of his team, which Armstrong ultimately settled for $5 million. Asked directly by Oprah whether he ever felt he was cheating, Armstrong says no. He says at the time it simply felt like leveling a playing field where he believed almost everyone was already doping. It's a justification that satisfies almost no one. Within 24 hours, Nike, Trek, Anheuser-Busch, and Oakley all end their partnerships, wiping out an estimated $75 million in sponsorship value in a single day. The case became the reason cycling and other endurance sports overhauled how they test athletes, moving toward the biological passport system, which tracks an athlete's blood values over years looking for suspicious patterns, instead of relying on catching a single banned substance on a single day. It's also become the standard cautionary tale about what happens when a legal team, a media machine, and a compelling personal story combine to make the truth expensive to tell. The Armstrong case is now the textbook example cited every time a new state-sponsored or team-wide doping scandal breaks, including Russia's own Olympic doping program, exposed just a few years later using strikingly similar whistleblower testimony. Armstrong himself never served any jail time and today hosts a cycling podcast, still partially banned from most competitive events for life, in a redemption arc that remains, by design, incomplete. The full case file, every teammate's testimony, every lawsuit, and where Armstrong is today, is linked below. New files unlock every Tuesday and Friday. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.